Boston headquarters, 41st floor conference room. The hum of fluorescent tubes filled the gaps between words no one wanted to speak aloud. Richard Alton, Vice President of Operations, leaned forward with the easy arrogance of someone convinced the rules bent to his will. "Rules are nothing compared to family power," he declared, voice cutting through the room's stillness. "My son Tyler will replace you." The statement landed like a stone in water ripples of discomfort visible in every glance exchanged around the polished mahogany table. The CFO, Julia McCrae, lowered her eyes to her notepad, pretending to annotate figures she had already memorized. Angela Rosen from legal pressed her lips together, making no move to challenge the words. HR staff typed nervously, recording the minutes but omitting the insult. Mireya Calder sat motionless at the far end, Director of Systems Compliance, posture composed like an anchored line of code. Her pen clicked once against the paper, the sound nearly swallowed by the low electrical buzz. Beneath the table, the small black keychain clipped to her laptop bag vibrated faintly as it activated timestamp 0914A. The device had logged the moment in silence. Her gaze moved deliberately. Julia's avoidance. Angela's restrained disapproval. Tyler's smirk as he leaned back, sneakers planted on the polished wood edge, muttering legacy dinosaur just loud enough to echo. Each observation was cataloged, as methodically as a compliance log entry. A memory flickered. 2 years earlier, at 01:12 a.m., the company's primary migration script collapsed mid-execution. Panic spread across 3 departments, but she alone sat in a dim cubicle, rewiring a failing node until the system stabilized. A scar still crossed her thumb from the faulty panel she had repaired that night. No one had remembered, but she had. Now, the dismissal of her value was public, witnessed, etched into silence. Mireya opened her notebook, drew the outline of a compliance workflow, and underlined in steady ink, Policy 14.7b Transition Lock Window. Richard continued to speak, praising his son's vision and modern instincts. No one interrupted, though several executives shifted uncomfortably. The room's only other sound was the faint ticking of Richard's silver pen against the tabletop, counting seconds without awareness. Unknown to him, an automated process had already fired earlier that morning. At 07:32 a.m., the system's compliance scheduler had dispatched a copy of Mireya's last submission to the chairman's assistant, quietly archived under the tag Regulatory Phase 2 Contingency. A timer had begun, impartial and unalterable. Mireya closed her folder with quiet precision. The meeting rolled forward, but its outcome was already set in motion by processes hidden beneath their notice, awaiting the next recorded change. The insult had been logged, but it was not the first. Mireya Calder understood patterns better than people believed, and each dismissal became another entry in a growing archive. On February 17th at 11:08 a.m., Tyler Alton had replied to her compliance brief in the general Slack channel with a curt TLDR. The document had been 3 sentences long. She captured the exchange, printed the thread, and stamped it with the date. On March 4th, Finance circulated an audit report claiming her department was running 12% over budget. The reality showed a 15% underspend. She printed the discrepancy, highlighted the line item, and filed it alongside the Slack thread. A week later, the calendar invite for the vendor risk review appeared without her name. Procurement and legal both received the notice. Her exclusion was conspicuous. She saved the invite metadata, noting the distribution list, and added it to the collection. At the office, her demeanor suggested compliance. She nodded through Richard Alton's announcements, even when he declared a new streamlining initiative that reduced her position to the hollow title of process lead. Legacy oversight. Her expression remained neutral, her hands folded. To colleagues, she looked sidelined. The real work took place at night, In her apartment, under the glow of a desk lamp, backup drives were labeled in careful handwriting, Q4 Restore Final. An encrypted folder in cold storage contained her signature logs, digital receipts of every compliance packet she had filed. A manila envelope in a rented locker in Somerville held printed copies, each page stamped and dated. Most critical was the draft compliance packet, unsent but fully prepared, embedded with a conditional trigger. The clause was precise. If project lead changes within 14 business days of Phase 2 submission, liability transfers to the initiating executive. At 10:47 p.m., the desk clock marked the moment she verified the automation rules. She traced the email's scheduled delivery route internal compliance inbox, chairman's assistant, and regulatory archive. She rechecked the encryption hash, confirming its integrity. The system's logic was impartial. It would execute without emotion, without hesitation. Richard noticed none of this. Tyler had no capacity to understand it. HR believed she was already fading from relevance, a relic of older systems. But the logs noticed, the timestamps noticed, and the system, built on rules, not favors, remembered everything. By the time her pen closed over the final notation, the foundation for accountability had been set, waiting for a change of ownership that would inevitably come. On Monday morning, Tyler Alton arrived in the operations wing with the posture of someone convinced authority came pre-installed. His blazer still carried the stitched brand label down the sleeve, the thread dangling as he moved. His first action was to unplug the dual monitor setup that had been in place for years and replace it with a single MacBook and a vanilla-scented candle. The symbolism was intentional, though shallow. At 10:07 a.m., he summoned the staff into the open workspace for what he called an alignment jam. Standing in front of the whiteboard, he declared, "If you can't explain a system in 60 seconds, it's too complicated. We're killing the old stack." His language was peppered with borrowed startup jargon, phrases that carried no operational weight. The consequences began to register within 48 hours. On Wednesday morning, vendor invoices failed in accounts payable. The missing metadata fields had previously been populated by Mireya Calder's layered override system. Without them, the system flagged the records as incomplete and froze payment. At 1:16 p.m. So, Finance escalated a memo to Operations 2, invoices rejected, escalation tags missing. The memo carried a timestamp of March 12, 4:42 p.m., logged into the financial archive. That same afternoon, engineers found themselves locked out during a sandbox environment refresh. Credentials that Mireya had maintained through manual cross-verification no longer validated. The lockout required a full reauthorization sequence, halting 2 ongoing development sprints. Customer support reported duplicate tickets flooding the queue from the new auto tag integration Tyler had approved without review. By evening, duplication errors had increased case volume by 37%. The audit system registered the leadership change. Audit log Japir 4478 recorded the transfer of project ownership M. Calder, T. Alton. The entry triggered the dormant compliance clause, silently initiating the countdown within Policy 14.7b's protected window. Vendors noticed as well. Apex Delta, contracted for critical network support, issued a direct message to operations. The email was brief and unsparing. "This is not a compliance problem. This is a leadership decision problem." It circulated among staff within minutes, screenshotted and resent in private channels. That evening, Mireya sat on her back porch in Cambridge, the noise of the city reduced to distant traffic. Her phone vibrated with a message from Devon, her former deputy. They ignored the compliance flags. "What do we do?" She typed a single word in reply. "Wait." The timer continued to run. Day 2 of the 14-day lock began with quiet precision. In her apartment, Mireya Calder opened the remote console and scanned the server logs. Twice in the early hours, 01:42 a.m., and again at 01:57 a.m. Tyler Alton had attempted to access the documentation folder she had purged before leaving. Both entries were recorded as unauthorized attempts, flagged with red error codes in the system log. She transcribed the timestamps into a leather-bound notebook labeled in block letters, "Transfer of Liability Notes." Each line was written as though it were an audit entry awaiting review. Across the city, Richard Alton raised a glass in a crowded pub. To anyone within earshot, he boasted that his son would modernize the entire operations unit, replacing obsolete bureaucracy with energy and vision. "The chairman will finally see we don't need relics like Calder," he declared, voice amplified by whiskey and conviction. His audience responded with half-hearted nods, more focused on their drinks than his pronouncements. Meanwhile, HR processed her exit paperwork. The stapled packet bore her name in thick blue ink, yet the system metadata told another story. The validation log showed the timestamp as March 8th, 3rd, 12 p.m., hours after her compliance packet had already triggered the lock. By procedural standards, the termination was invalid, filed outside the permissible sequence. The contradiction remained invisible to most, buried in the metadata, but it was unalterable. Inside the data center, the environment emitted faint warnings. Michael Yu, the IT lead, noticed ghost flags appearing in the compliance audit cycle. Old triggers that should have been dormant still pulsed at irregular intervals, as if awaiting an event. He copied the anomaly reports onto a personal flash drive, the silver casing worn from years of use, sliding it into his pocket. He muttered under his breath. 4 days left. That evening, Mireya drove to Logan Airport. She parked in the long-term garage, walked past travelers wheeling luggage, and entered a rented cold storage locker. From her bag, she removed a small drive case, marked in tidy lettering, Q44 backup 3rd copy. She placed it on the top shelf, locked the unit, and walked away without hesitation. The systems continued to run on schedule, each process marking time like the steady pulse of an unseen metronome. The lock was active, the evidence preserved, and the countdown irreversible. The timer ticked forward into the next phase. By the second week, the surface message across operations was unified. Internal Slack channels carried the slogan, "Legacies out, Agiles in." New posters labeled Ops 2. 00 appeared on corridor walls, their fonts bold but their promises vague. On the surface, a transformation was being marketed. Beneath the posters, the system logs told another story. Finance reported 3 missed compliance snapshots, each flagged in red during routine checks. The audit scheduler, once maintained manually by Mireya Calder, now registered gaps too large to be dismissed as delays. In legal analyst Janice Heller opened the Phase 2 dashboard and noticed the anomaly immediately. Despite Richard Alton's manual edits on printed agendas, the system continued to auto-populate Lead M, Calder into compliance headers. Janice captured a screenshot, time-stamped it, and added it to her private archive. HR provided its own piece of evidence. An intern tasked with inbox monitoring screenshotted an email Tyler had sent to several managers. The subject line read, "Streamline now." The body was blunt. "We don't need dinosaur processes anymore." The screenshot circulated quietly among interns before reaching Janice, who slid it into her just-in-case folder. On March 14th at 08:01 a.m., Janice sent a formal note to Richard Phase 2 review next Thursday. "Are we aligned?" The response arrived at 10:36 a.m. Not from Richard, but from Tyler. "We're good. Don't need that dinosaur process anymore." Janice read it twice, printed the exchange, and filed it under a section she labeled Critical Missteps. Contractors began to fracture as well. Apex Delta, already strained by unpaid invoices, confirmed that several of its network specialists had walked off after 29 days without compensation. Their exit email was sharp. "This is not a compliance problem. This is leadership negligence." Within hours, the line was reposted as a meme across side channels, paired with images of Tyler's vanilla candle. In Cambridge, Mireya's phone buzzed again. Devon, her former deputy, had been monitoring the atmosphere. "Janice looks like she'll faint. Do you want me to leak the logs?" His message was brief. Urgent. Mireya typed back a single instruction. Do nothing. Observe. The decision tightened the silence. Every misstep was being logged. Every oversight preserved in systems that no longer answered to Richard or Tyler. The countdown continued. Invisible to those who dismissed procedure. Audible only to those listening for the clicks in the machinery. The boardroom date drew closer with each entry recorded. On Thursday afternoon, the confirmation arrived. Chairman Eleanor Whitmore would attend the quarterly audit in person. Her message was concise. Phase 2 accountability will be reviewed in person. The announcement electrified Richard Alton. In the operations bullpen, he nearly shouted, "Finally, a chance to show our transformation." He ordered communications to prepare posters, instructed marketing to refresh the Ops 2.0 visuals, and pressed his son Brett to rehearse phrases like disruption architecture and horizontal transformation. The preparation was loud, visible, and frantic. Underneath the noise, fractures widened. Legal circulated a cautious note. No risk reduction measures had been documented since the reorganization. Angela Rosen, lead counsel, underlined the absence 3 times in her draft, but received no response. Finance raised another issue. Vendor invoices remained unreconciled. 2 already past 30 days overdue. The question reached Richard during a rehearsal. He waved it away. "That's operational detail. The board wants vision, not paperwork." The analysts recorded the dismissal without further comment. In a quiet corner, Devon Patel acted with more precision. He accessed the compliance archive and downloaded Karen Calder's last audit draft, emailing it to a private address with the subject line "Final Reference." The file remained unopened on his personal device, but the safeguard was in place. The legal dashboards provided the sharpest warning. Despite Richard's insistence, the auto-generated header on the Phase 2 compliance module continued to display "Let him Calder, drawn from last quarter's filings." Richard grew irritated, printed the dashboard summary, and struck through the name with red Sharpie, scrawling "IR" Alton in all capitals across the margin. The manual correction convinced no one, but it allowed him to proceed with rehearsals uninterrupted. Rain fell steadily that Friday morning, streaking down the glass of the tower's facade. At 8:55 a.m., the boardroom filled. The climate system kept the air at a chill that felt closer to a server room than a conference space. Branded water bottles had been placed with care at each seat, arranged like centerpieces at a memorial. Executives arrived in silence. Finance sat with laptops closed. Legal carried folders marked in blue. HR appeared with coffee they did not drink. Engineers, pulled in at the last minute, waited without speaking, eyes scanning the empty projector screen. The hum of the HVAC blended with the faint tap of rain on the windows. At the far end, a chair still bore a nameplate untouched, M. Calder. No one had removed it. The door handle turned at precisely 9:02 a.m. At 9:02 a.m., the boardroom door opened. Eleanor Whitmore stepped inside, rain still tracing the shoulders of her dark coat. She paused near the entrance, scanning the table with a deliberate gaze. When her eyes reached the far end, they lingered on the untouched nameplate. M. Calder. Her first words were direct. "Where is Ms. Calder?" Richard Alton shifted in his seat, producing a chuckle that failed to mask his unease. "She moved on," he said quickly. "My son Tyler leads operations now." Eleanor placed a packet of papers on the center of the table with controlled precision. The header in bold typeface read, "Change of Project Owner Contingency Notice, Policy 14.7b. Gasps broke the silence. Angela Rosen from Legal began typing furiously, her keystrokes sharp in the chilled air. The finance analysts froze, eyes locked on the document. Tyler blinked, uncertain, his smirk faltering as he leaned forward. Eleanor opened the packet to the first page and read aloud, "If the project lead is reassigned within 14 business days of final submission, accountability transfers to the initiating executive. See timestamp. Page 6. Angela's whisper cut through the room. "Oh my God!" The projector, already humming, flickered. The compliance dashboard appeared on screen, replacing the slide deck that had been prepared for the audit. Across the top, in stark black letters, it displayed Owner Richard Alton. Richard's complexion drained. He leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table. "That can't be binding," he muttered, the words breaking under the strain of disbelief. Eleanor turned to page 6. "Timestamp March 8, 3:12 p.m., she recited. "Your termination of Ms. Calder occurred after the compliance packet had already locked. The record shows legal countersignature. Immutable." She slid the page forward. Angela stopped typing, her hands hovering above the keyboard as she confirmed the line herself. The evidence was plain digital signature, validation code, legal countersign, all visible in sequence. The room imploded into silence. The only audible sound was the hum of the HVAC, underscored by the rain striking against the glass. Eleanor's voice cut through with unflinching clarity. "Mr. Alton, what have you done?" Richard sat motionless, his pen rolling from his fingers onto the polished surface. Tyler's lips parted as though to answer, but no words followed. The projector refreshed once more, locking the dashboard view in place. Accountability, Richard Alton. The silence held, dense and immovable, as the board absorbed the implications. The next move would no longer belong to him. The fallout began within minutes of the contingency notice landing on the table. Security arrived discreetly, badges collected in silence. Tyler Alton was the first escorted out, his voice raised in protest, insisting the systems were functioning as designed. The words carried no weight. The logs already showed otherwise. Richard Alton remained in his chair, hands trembling against the polished wood. The silver pen he had carried into every meeting for a decade now lay motionless beside the compliance packet that had sealed his liability. His face was pale, his posture slumped, the authority drained away by a timestamp. Legal moved quickly. Angela Rosen announced internal interviews to begin immediately, her tone flat, precise, without room for negotiation. Compliance IT initiated an emergency restore sequence. The directive was issued at 10:07 a.m., marked in the system archive. Down in the operations war room, 2 analysts extracted a compressed file from cold storage, Karen Core, backup, final v2.zip. The archive had been built under Mireya Calder's oversight months earlier. Its checksum verified 3 separate times. The file unzipped without error. Within moments, dashboards that had been failing for weeks began to flicker back to life. Audit snapshots realigned with their proper intervals. Vendor records restored. Permissions corrected. The company exhaled in data rather than words. Systems once unstable resumed their cadence, steady and unbroken. Back in the boardroom, Eleanor Whitmore watched the progress reports appear across her tablet. When she spoke, her voice carried neither triumph nor comfort. "This isn't cleanup," she said. "This is a reckoning." No one challenged the statement. Miles away, in Rockport, Massachusetts, Mireya walked along the weathered pier. A thermos of coffee warmed her hand, her boots pressed into damp wood still slick from the tide. The air smelled of salt and iron, gulls circling overhead in uneven arcs. Her phone vibrated against her palm. The message displayed a single line from Eleanor's executive assistant. "Would you consider consulting flexible terms?" The invitation was formal, deliberate, written as though the company already understood it was negotiating from weakness. Mireya turned the device over, face down against the pier railing. She lifted her eyes toward the horizon where the gray sky met the water's edge. The gulls lifted with the wind, rising higher until their shapes blurred against the clouds. Recognition was unnecessary. The proof of her work was already embedded in the systems that continued to run, safeguarded by the silence she had maintained. The reckoning had arrived, and she no longer needed to sit at the table to witness it.